The Colorado Territory stretched endless and unforgiving beneath a blood-red sunset, and somewhere in those jagged peaks, a woman ran for her life. They called her the Giant Widow, 6 feet and 2 inches of desperation wrapped in a torn traveling dress. Eliza Thornton had been running for 3 days straight, and the 12 men hunting her were getting closer. You see, when your dead husband leaves you a gold claim worth killing for, and when the most powerful judge in 3 counties decides he wants it, being different isn't just lonely anymore. It becomes deadly. This is the story of how one mountain man made those 12 hunters vanish into thin air, and how 2 broken souls discovered that sometimes the only way to heal is to protect someone even more wounded than yourself. Before we dive into the story, if you love tales of redemption and unexpected courage in the Wild West, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heart-wrenching stories tomorrow. And drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. We love hearing from our worldwide family of story lovers. Now let's continue with the story. Eliza's boots had worn through 2 miles back. Each step left bloody prints on the rocky trail, but stopping meant death. The setting sun painted the mountains the color of old blood, fitting for what was coming. Behind her, she could hear the horses. 12 riders led by Silas Vance, Judge Harlan Crow's personal executioner. They weren't trying to hide their approach anymore. They wanted her to hear them coming, to break from fear before they even reached her. Her height had always made her stand out in towns where proper ladies were supposed to be delicate. At church socials, she'd tower over the other women, could look most men straight in the eye. The whispers had followed her since childhood. Too tall, too strong, hands too rough from working her family's failed farm after her parents died. No man would want a woman who could carry her own weight, they said. No man except Thomas. Thomas had loved that about her. Said she was built like the mountains themselves, strong and unmovable. He'd been a small man, barely reaching her shoulder, but his heart had been bigger than these Colorado peaks. They'd met at the general store in Millfield, where she'd been haggling over seed prices. He'd stepped in, paid the difference without her asking, then tipped his hat and walked away. She'd chased him down, ready to return his money with a piece of her mind about charity. Instead, she'd found him laughing. Never seen a woman move so fast in skirts, he'd said. Like watching a deer run, all grace and power. But Thomas was 6 months in the ground now. Fever took him quick, leaving her with nothing but memories and a claim deed he'd kept hidden in their cabin wall. The claim he'd staked had turned out richer than anyone imagined. Rich enough for Judge Crow to suddenly produce papers saying Thomas owed him money from a loan that never existed. Rich enough to send 12 killers after his widow when she refused to sign it over. The trail curved sharply ahead, disappearing into a grove of aspens. Their white bark glowed like bones in the dying light. Eliza forced her bleeding feet faster. Behind her, hoofbeats echoed off canyon walls, multiplying until it sounded like an army pursued her. Her dress caught on thorn bushes, tearing strips from the fabric. The blue calico Thomas had bought her for their 2nd anniversary was now more rags than dress. She'd sold her horse 3 towns back for food and a gun she didn't know how to shoot. The general store owner had looked at her with pity, this tall woman alone with haunted eyes. He'd tried to give her extra supplies, but she'd refused charity. Pride was all she had left, pride and the Colt revolver that weighed heavy in her travel bag, useless as a decoration when she'd never fired a gun in her life. Voices echoed off the canyon walls now, distinct and terrible. "She went this way, boys. Look at the blood." That was Vance's voice, gravelly from years of tobacco and whiskey. "The Giant Widow's leaving us a trail clear as day." Laughter followed, ugly and confident. They were spreading out. She could hear it in how their voices came from different directions, trying to cut off her escape routes, herd her like cattle toward a cliff or corner. Vance's laugh carried on the wind. He was enjoying this. In town, she'd heard stories about him, how he'd hunted Apache warriors for the army, collecting scalps for bounty, how he'd tracked a family of settlers who'd witnessed one of Crow's murders, found them hiding in a cave after 2 weeks. What he'd done to them before they died was whispered about, but never spoken aloud. The giant widow, they'd called her in town, like she was some kind of circus curiosity. Well, let them laugh. She'd survived 28 years of being different. She could survive one more night. The aspen grove offered momentary cover. She pressed herself against one of the larger trees, trying to catch her breath. Her lungs burned like she'd swallowed fire. 3 days without real sleep, only snatched moments of rest behind rocks or in dried creek beds. Her stomach cramped from hunger. She'd found some berries yesterday, but they'd made her sick, might have been poison for all she knew. The creek water she'd drunk this morning had tasted of metal and mud. But her body betrayed her now when she needed it most. The world started spinning, the white aspens blurring together like a child's toy. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Her knees buckled without warning. She tried to grab a tree trunk, missed, stumbled sideways onto what looked like a deer trail, barely visible in the dying light. The path seemed to pull her forward even as her legs gave out completely. The last thing Eliza saw before darkness claimed her was a shape moving between the trees. Not a horse, not a man exactly, something else. Something that moved like the mountain itself had come alive, silent and massive and inevitable. Gray eyes and a scarred face, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Then nothing but black, and the strange sensation of being lifted, carried like a child despite her height. The voices of her hunters grew distant, confused, as if the mountain had swallowed her whole. In her last moment of consciousness, she heard a voice, rough as granite, but somehow gentle. The mountain doesn't give up its own easy. Then silence, complete and absolute, like she'd fallen into the heart of the stone itself. Josiah Ridge hadn't spoken to another human being in 7 years. That was by choice. The mountain kept him company enough, and the mountain didn't ask questions about the scars that covered half his face or why his hands sometimes shook when thunder rolled through the valleys. So when he found the woman collapsed on his secret trail, his first instinct was to turn around and let nature take its course. But something about the blood on her feet stopped him. Those weren't the wounds of someone who'd given up. Those were the wounds of someone who'd kept going long after their body begged them to quit. He crouched beside her in the gathering darkness, studying her face by what little moonlight filtered through the aspens. Even unconscious, there was a fierceness to her features. Strong jaw, sun-weathered skin that spoke of outdoor work, calluses on her hands visible even in the poor light. And Lord, she was tall, nearly matched his own 6 feet and 4 inches, which explained the torn hem of her dress, clearly made for a smaller woman and altered poorly. The fabric had been fine once, he could tell. Store-bought, not homespun. Someone had cared enough to buy her nice things, even if they couldn't afford to have them properly fitted. Her hands drew his attention again, not soft like the few society ladies he'd known before. Before the war, before the orders he couldn't follow, before everything went to hell and the mountain became his only friend. These were working hands, with old scars across the palms from what looked like years of handling rope or reins. A thin gold band on her left hand caught the moonlight. Married then, or widowed. The dress was torn and dirty, but he could see traces of careful mending from before her flight. Someone who took care of what little she had. Josiah heard the horses long before he saw them. 12 riders, maybe more, spreading through the lower trails like wolves on a scent. Their voices carried clear in the still night air. They were confident, careless. City men playing at being trackers. Real hunters would know to keep quiet, know that sound travels strange in mountains, bouncing off canyon walls and doubling back. These men relied on numbers and fear, not skill. He could leave her here, should leave her here. Whatever trouble she was in, it wasn't his problem. He'd learned the hard way that playing hero only got people killed, usually the wrong people. The weight of old ghosts pressed against his chest, faces of children he'd failed to save, women who'd trusted him to protect them and died for that trust. His scarred hand went unconsciously to his face, tracing the ridge of damaged tissue that ran from temple to jaw. But his hands were already sliding under her shoulders and knees, lifting her like she weighed nothing. 7 years of hauling elk carcasses and chopping would have kept his strength up, even if his soul had withered. She was lighter than she should be for her height, probably hadn't eaten proper in days. Her head lolled against his chest, and he caught the scent of lavender soap beneath the sweat and fear. When was the last time he'd smelled lavender? Sarah had loved that scent back when he'd had a wife, a life, a future that didn't involve hiding in mountains like a wounded animal. The memory hit him unexpected and sharp. Sarah's funeral, the lavender bundles her sister had placed on the coffin. She died while he was at Sand Creek, died believing her husband was a hero instead of knowing what he'd become. Maybe that was a mercy. She never had to see the monster the war had started to make him into. Never had to know about the orders he'd followed before the ones he couldn't. At least she'd been spared that. His cabin sat hidden 2 miles up, built into the mountain itself, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. The path to it was his masterpiece of paranoia and preparation. 7 years of careful work had created a maze of false trails, natural obstacles, and hidden dangers that would confuse anyone following. The main path seemed to lead to a sheer cliff. The real route required knowing which rocks were stable, which shadows hid passages, which trees had handholds carved into their far sides. Josiah moved through the darkness like the ghost some folks in the valley claimed he was. The ghost of the mountain, they called him, when they spoke of him at all, usually to scare children into staying close to home. Don't wander into the high country, parents would say. The ghost will get you. He's got half a face and eyes like winter, and he hates all living things. If only they knew the truth was worse. He didn't hate the living. He envied them. The woman stirred once as he navigated a particularly narrow ledge, mumbling something that sounded like Thomas and won't sign. Her fingers clutched at his shirt, and he felt the surprising strength in them even unconscious. Whatever had driven her to run had given her a powerful reason to survive. He'd seen that kind of determination before, in soldiers who kept fighting with bullets in them, in settlers who walked 1,000 miles on bloody feet for the promise of land. Inside the cabin, he laid her on his bed, the first person besides himself to touch it since he'd built it. The bed had been made for his height, one of the few pieces of furniture that actually fit him proper. She looked right on it, like it had been waiting for someone her size all along. By candlelight, he could see the damage better. Her feet were destroyed, full of thorns and cuts that would fester if not treated. Some of the cuts were deep, probably from sharp rocks when her boots wore through. Dehydration had left her lips cracked and bleeding. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of days without sleep. Someone had been chasing this woman hard, wanting her desperate and broken. Josiah knew that kind of hunt, knew what it felt like to be tracked by men who enjoyed the fear more than the capture. After Sand Creek, after he'd stood between Chivington's soldiers and those Cheyenne children, after the explosion that had given him these scars, he'd been hunted just like this. For 3 months, he'd stayed barely ahead of military justice and Chivington's personal vendetta. His scarred hands moved to the cabin wall where he'd hidden his old uniform, buried it in the logs like a shameful secret. He fetched water from the barrel, clean cloth from his supplies. The water was mountain cold, pure from an underground spring he'd found his second year here. His hands were gentle as he cleaned her wounds, remembering skills from another life when he'd been trusted to heal instead of harm. Before he'd been a soldier, he'd studied medicine for a year, his mother's dream for him. Those skills had served him well in the cavalry, made him valuable for more than just his tracking abilities. Now they let him tend this stranger's wounds with something approaching competence. She stirred once while he worked, green eyes fluttering open briefly. They were the color of spring grass, startling against her sun-darkened skin. She looked at him without fear, which surprised him. Most people couldn't meet his scarred face without flinching. "Thomas," she whispered, hope and grief mingled in that single word. "No," he said quietly. "You're safe. Rest." She nodded, trusting him despite being a stranger, and closed her eyes again. That trust did something to his chest, made it tight and painful. He should have been planning how to get rid of her come morning. Instead, he found himself building up the fire to keep her warm and preparing broth from dried venison and wild onions. The mountain had kept him safe for 7 years. Maybe it was time he returned the favor. Just this once. Just until she could walk again. Then she'd leave, and he'd go back to being dead inside. where it was safe, where caring couldn't hurt him anymore. But even as he told himself these lies, he knew something had already changed. The moment he'd picked her up instead of walking away, something in him had cracked open, and he wasn't sure he could close it again. Dawn broke ugly over the mountain, gray and cold with the promise of snow. With it came the sound of angry men. Silas Vance stood at the base of the trail where Eliza's bloody footprints disappeared, his scarred knuckles white as he gripped his rifle. The morning light revealed his face clearly for the first time. Years of violence had carved themselves into his features, from the knife scar across his throat to the cold deadness in his brown eyes. 12 of Judge Crow's best trackers and killers spread out behind him, each one worth their weight in ammunition when it came to hunting human prey. But the trail had gone cold, vanished into thin air like the woman had sprouted wings. She didn't just disappear, Vance growled, spitting tobacco juice onto the rocks. The brown stream landed exactly where her last footprint showed. Someone helped her. Look here. He pointed to the subtle signs most of his men had missed. A broken twig too high for the woman to have caused. A boot print, larger and deeper than hers, barely visible in the soft earth. We got ourselves a problem, boys. Someone who knows these mountains is hiding our prize. Behind him, his men shifted uneasily. There were stories about these high peaks, about the ghost of the mountain who left no tracks and took no visitors. Most dismissed them as superstition, but here in the gray dawn with mist clinging to the pines like funeral shrouds, those stories felt more real. Spread out, Vance commanded. Groups of 3. Check every deer path, every cave. The giant widow is here somewhere, and I'll be damned if we're going back empty-handed. The judge had made it crystal clear. Bring back the deed to that gold claim, or don't come back at all. And Silas Vance hadn't survived 20 years of doing Crow's dirty work by disappointing him. He'd hunted men across 3 states, tracked Apache warriors through desert that would kill most white men in a day. One tall woman and some mountain hermit wouldn't stop him now. Up in the hidden cabin, Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and the sight of a stranger's back. He was tall, taller even than her, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical work. His dark hair hung past his collar, longer than proper, streaked with premature gray. Memory crashed over her like cold water. The chase, the collapse, and now this. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her bandaged feet like someone had driven nails through them. The man turned at her movement, and she couldn't stop her gasp. Half his face was a web of old scars, the kind that came from being too close to an explosion or fire. The damage ran from his left temple down to his jaw, pulling his mouth slightly sideways. But his eyes were what held her, gray as winter sky and holding a sadness so deep she could drown in it. Those eyes had seen too much, done too much, lost too much. You're safe, Josiah said, his voice rough from disuse, gravelly like he'd been gargling rocks. For now. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, every motion controlled and deliberate. He handed her a cup of coffee, noted how she didn't flinch from his appearance. Most people did. Some had even crossed themselves like he was a demon. 12 men are searching the lower trails. They'll work their way up eventually. He moved to the window, a narrow slit cut at an angle that gave him a view without being seen from outside. His whole cabin was like that, she was starting to realize. Built for defense, for hiding. The door was reinforced with iron bands, the walls thicker than necessary. Judge Crow's men, from what you were mumbling. You must have something he wants real bad. Eliza's hands shook as she held the cup, the hot ceramic burning her palms, but she didn't care. The pain meant she was alive. My husband's gold claim. Thomas died 6 months back. Fever took him in 3 days. Suddenly, the judge produces papers saying we owed him money from some loan Thomas never took. Wants the claim as payment. She took a sip of the coffee, felt strength returning with the bitter heat. Thomas could barely write his own name, let alone sign loan papers. But Crow's got a judge's seal, makes it all look legal. I'm not signing anything. That claim is all I have left of Thomas, and I'll die before I let that monster take it. Dying seems to be their plan, Josiah said quietly. Through the window slit, he watched the men below split into groups of 3, each taking a different route up the mountain. Smart, but not smart enough. They were staying to the obvious paths, the ones that looked like trails. They didn't know about the false leads he'd spent years creating, the dead ends that looked promising, the circular routes that would have them walking in loops for hours. You should leave. Now, I'll show you a back trail. You can reach the next county by nightfall. Even as he said it, he knew it was impossible. She couldn't walk on those feet, and he couldn't carry her that far without being seen. But he had to offer, had to give her the choice to run before things got complicated, before he got involved beyond the simple act of providing shelter. Eliza tried to stand, using the wall for support. The moment her feet touched the floor, she cried out, a sound of pure agony that she tried to muffle with her hand. The bandages immediately spotted with fresh blood, the wounds reopening from the pressure. She wouldn't make it 100 yards, let alone to the next county. They both knew it. She collapsed back onto the bed, face pale with pain. Josiah's jaw tightened as he watched her struggle. He recognized the determination in her face, the refusal to give up even when her body betrayed her. Outside, one of the search parties was getting closer to his first trap line, the one he'd set up years ago to discourage casual visitors. 3 men, talking loud enough to wake the dead, complaining about the cold and the climb. Please, Eliza said, and he could hear how much it cost her to beg. I have nowhere else to go. My parents are dead, have been since I was 17. No family, no friends who'd stand against the judge. The few folks who might have helped are too scared of Crow to even look at me. If you send me out there, I'm dead. She met his scarred gaze directly, those green eyes holding his without wavering. I can see you know what it's like to be hunted, to have nowhere safe to run. She was right, and that truth sat heavy in his chest. He did know, knew the bone-deep exhaustion of running for days, knew the terror of hearing horses in the distance and wondering if this was the day they caught up, knew the despair of realizing the whole world had turned against you and there was nowhere left to hide except places like this, places outside civilization's reach. Josiah was quiet for a long moment, watching the men below disturb his mountain's peace. These were the kind of men who'd burn the forest to flush out one rabbit, who'd poison a stream to kill one fish, who'd destroy everything beautiful and wild just to prove they could. His hands curled into fists, old anger stirring like a hibernating bear waking up mean and hungry. Nobody takes what they want from my mountain, he said finally, and there was something dangerous in his voice that made Eliza shiver despite the warmth of the cabin. The quiet man who'd tended her wounds was gone, replaced by something harder, something that had survived 7 years alone by being worse than whatever came hunting. You stay put. Don't leave this cabin for any reason. There's food in that chest, water in the barrel. The door bars from inside. Whatever you hear outside, whatever you think is happening, you don't look. You don't open that door. Understand? Before she could answer, he was gone, melting into the forest like smoke. One moment he was there, solid and real. The next there was just an empty doorway and the morning mist swirling where he'd been. Below, 12 wolves circled, thinking they were the predators, confident in their numbers and their guns. They were about to learn that on this mountain, there was something far more dangerous than wolves. Something that had been sleeping for 7 years, but was finally, terrifyingly, waking up. The first man to disappear was called Hutchins. He'd been bragging just that morning about how he'd tracked Apache warriors through worse terrain than this. These mountains ain't nothing compared to the Sangre de Cristo range, he'd said, chest puffed out like a rooster. I once tracked a Apache brave for 6 days through snow up to my waist. Now he dangled upside down from a pine tree, caught in a snare so perfectly hidden that he'd never seen it coming. The rope had yanked him 15 feet into the air before he could even scream, his rifle tumbling into the leaves below with a dull thud. His partners, 2 younger men named Franklin and Moore, had been walking 20 feet behind him, passing a flask between them despite Vance's orders to stay sharp. They heard the swoosh of the rope, the crack of the branch, and Hutchins' strangled yelp. By the time they looked up, their partner was swinging like a pendulum, blood rushing to his face, turning it purple as a bruise. Get me down. Hutchins tried to shout, but the rope had caught him around the ankle and knee, twisting his body so that breathing was hard. Franklin ran forward, reaching for the rope, but it was too high. Moore tried to climb the tree, but the trunk had been greased with something slippery, probably animal fat. His hands couldn't find purchase. That's when Josiah emerged from the shadows, just for a moment. The morning sun was behind him, turning him into a dark silhouette with burning gray eyes. Hutchins saw him first, tried to scream a warning, but Josiah moved faster than seemed possible for such a large man. A handful of cloth was stuffed into Hutchins' mouth, muffling his cries. "The mountain doesn't like trespassers," Josiah said quietly, his scarred face inches from Hutchins' inverted one. "You should have stayed in the valley where you belong." Franklin finally saw him, fumbled for his gun, but Josiah was already gone, vanished into the undergrowth like he'd never been there at all. The younger man fired anyway, the shot echoing off the canyon walls, bringing shouts from the other search parties. But there was nothing to hit, just shadows and trees and the sound of Hutchins' muffled protests from above. The second and third men fell to the pit. Bennett and Cole had been partners for 5 years, worked together like a well-oiled machine. They'd done every dirty job Crow had needed, from burning out squatters to collecting debts with interest paid in blood. They moved through the forest carefully, or so they thought, checking each step before committing their weight. But the ground they trusted betrayed them. The false floor had taken Josiah 3 weeks to build, back in his second year on the mountain. Branches woven together, covered with dirt and leaves, supported by stakes that would hold until just the right amount of weight hit the center. It collapsed with a crack like breaking bones, sending both men tumbling into a 10-foot hole. The walls were smooth rock, carefully selected and placed. No handholds, no roots to grab, no way up without help. Cole's ankle snapped when he landed, the sound echoing up from the pit. His scream was pure animal pain. Bennett landed on top of him, driving the breath from his lungs, making the pain worse. No spikes at the bottom. Josiah wasn't a killer by choice anymore. He'd seen enough death at Sand Creek to last 10 lifetimes. But by the time anyone found them, if anyone found them, the mountain would have done its own work. Cold, exposure, maybe wolves if they smelled the blood from Cole's bone breaking through skin. From the cabin, Eliza heard the distant shouts, the confusion spreading through the search parties like wildfire. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to see through the narrow window slit. Nothing but trees and shadows dancing in the morning light. But something was happening out there. The confident voices from dawn were turning fearful, edges of panic creeping in. She could hear Vance cursing, his voice carrying clear in the thin mountain air, ordering the men to regroup, to stay together, to stop wandering off alone. 3 men had simply vanished, and the remaining 9 were starting to understand they weren't the only hunters on this mountain. The stories about the ghost were starting to feel less like folklore and more like warning. Eliza found herself holding her breath, listening for any sound that might be Josiah returning. Part of her was terrified of what he was doing out there, but another part, a part that surprised her, felt savage satisfaction. These men had hunted her like an animal. Now they knew how it felt. The 4th man, a loudmouth named Davis who'd been particularly vocal about what he'd do when they caught the giant widow, triggered the deadfall. He'd been following what looked like a clear trail, even saw what might have been a footprint in the soft earth. He was so focused on the ground that he never saw the rope stretched between 2 trees at shin height. The moment his boot caught it, the whole mountainside seemed to come alive. Logs thundered down from above, an avalanche of wood that Josiah had balanced perfectly over the years. Not enough to kill, he'd tested it with deer carcasses, but enough to terrify. Davis dove sideways, screaming, scrambling for cover as timber crashed around him. Dust and bark filled the air. When it settled, Davis was curled in a ball behind a boulder, shaking like a leaf in a storm. His partners, 2 brothers named Carson, were nowhere to be seen. They'd run in opposite directions when the logs started falling, and now Davis was alone. Inside the cabin, Eliza watched Josiah return as the sun reached its midday height. His clothes were torn, dirt streaked across his face, a scratch on his cheek from a branch, but he moved with the same quiet grace. like a big cat coming home from a hunt. He checked her bandages without speaking, his hands impossibly gentle for someone who'd just orchestrated such violence. The contrast made her shiver. She caught his wrist as he turned away, her fingers barely able to wrap around it. "Are they dead?" she asked, needing to know what kind of man was protecting her. Whether she'd traded one monster for another, or if this scarred mountain ghost had limits to his violence. "No," Josiah said, and she heard something like regret in his voice. "Death is easy. Quick. Over in moments, and then nothing but silence. What they deserve is fear. The kind that sits in your belly and eats you from inside. The kind they've been feeding you for 3 days." He pulled free of her grip, moved to prepare food. She could see his hands shaking slightly. Adrenaline or old memories, she couldn't tell. "I've left them for the mountain to judge. If they're smart, they'll run. If they're not, the wolves will find them before morning." Eliza studied his scarred profile as he worked, cutting venison into strips with practiced motions. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "When I first saw you, half conscious and afraid, I thought you might be Death himself, come to collect me." Josiah's hands stilled for a moment, the knife pausing mid-cut. "Maybe I am," he said quietly. "Death, I mean, just not yours." He resumed cutting, each slice precise. "I've been dead inside for 7 years. Dead to the world, dead to feeling anything but survival. Then I found you on that trail, bleeding and broken but still fighting, and something in me remembered what it was like to care whether someone lived or died." Outside, Vance's voice carried on the wind, screaming for his men to report in. Only 8 voices answered, some of them shaky with fear. The ghost of the mountain had taken 4 of his men without killing a single one, without firing a shot except Franklin's panic discharge. And the day was only half done. On this mountain, Josiah Ridge was showing them what real hunting looked like. Not 12 against 1, but 1 against 12, and the 1 was winning. The fire crackled between them as darkness settled over the mountain like a heavy blanket. Outside, Vance's remaining men had made camp, too afraid to navigate the trails at night after what had happened during the day. They'd built their fires big, wasteful, city men thinking light would keep them safe. They didn't understand that on this mountain, fire just made you an easier target, destroyed your night vision, told every predator exactly where you were. Josiah had given Eliza his only chair while he sat on the floor, his back against the wall where he could watch the door. He'd positioned himself between her and any danger that might come through, though he tried to make it look casual. They'd been quiet for an hour, but the silence felt different now. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken questions. The kind of silence that comes before confessions, before truths that change everything. "You were military," Eliza said finally. It wasn't a question. She'd been watching him all day, the way he moved, the tactical precision of his trap placement, how he'd checked sight lines when he'd returned. "Cavalry scout, from the look of it. Maybe special assignments, the kind they don't write about in newspapers." Josiah's gray eyes flickered to her face, surprised by her observation. Most people saw the scars and stopped looking, too uncomfortable to notice anything else about him. "My father was Army," she explained, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Career soldier, fought in the Mexican War, then the frontier campaigns. Before he died, he taught me to recognize the signs. Said it might keep me safe someday, knowing who had real training and who was just playing soldier." She leaned forward, studying him in the firelight. "You're not just trained, though. You're officer trained. The way you plan those traps, thinking 3 moves ahead, that's West Point thinking, isn't it?" Josiah stared into the fire, and for a moment Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. The flames reflected in his gray eyes, turning them gold and red, like sunrise over blood. Then the words came, slow and painful like pulling thorns from flesh. "Captain Josiah Ridge, 3rd Colorado Cavalry. Or I was, until Sand Creek." His scarred hand touched his face unconsciously, fingers tracing the damage. "November 29th, 1864. They called it a battle. History might remember it different. Should remember it different." Eliza's breath caught. She knew about Sand Creek. Everyone did, though people told different versions depending on their politics. The massacre of peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho, mostly women and children. Some called it a necessary action against hostiles. Others whispered it was butchery. You were there, she whispered, not sure if she should move closer or farther away. Josiah nodded, his eyes never leaving the flames. I was supposed to lead the dawn attack. Colonel Chivington's orders were crystal clear. No prisoners, not even the infants. His voice broke slightly on the last word. 700 soldiers against a camp of mostly women, children, and old men. The warriors were out hunting, exactly where we'd been told they'd be. It was planned that way. Attack when the camp was defenseless. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window, unable to sit still with the memories pressing down. I'd seen combat before. Killed men who were trying to kill me. That's war, ugly but understandable. But this, they had white flags flying. American flags the government had given them. Chief Black Kettle was waving both, trying to show they were peaceful. Chivington ordered us to fire anyway. You refused, Eliza said, understanding dawning. The scars, the explosion damage, it was starting to make sense. I tried to stop it, Josiah corrected, his voice bitter. Rode my horse between the cavalry line and a group of children who were running for the creek. Knocked down 2 soldiers who were aiming at a woman carrying an infant. Then someone, maybe Chivington himself, ordered a cannon turned on my position. He touched his scars again. Grape shot and burning powder. Should have killed me. Sometimes wish it had. How many did you save? Eliza asked, moving to stand beside him despite the pain in her feet. She needed him to know she wasn't running from his truth. 12 children made it to the creek and downstream. Maybe a handful of women. Not enough. Not nearly enough. His hands gripped the windowsill hard enough to leave marks in the wood. I woke up 3 days later in a settler's barn. They'd found me half dead, assumed I was a casualty of Indian attack. By the time I was conscious enough to travel, Chivington had already put out word. Captain Ridge was a traitor, a deserter, possibly insane from combat fatigue. $5,000 bounty for desertion during wartime. Eliza reached out, touched his arm gently. You try to do right when everyone around you was doing wrong. That's not something to hide from. That's something to honor. Josiah turned to look at her, really look at her for the first time. In the firelight, her green eyes held no judgment, only understanding. What about you? He asked, needing to change the subject from his own ghosts. What brings the giant widow to my mountain? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Is that what they're calling me? I suppose it fits. Too tall, too strong, too much for what a woman should be. She moved back to the chair, her feet protesting every step. I've been running too, in my own way. All my life, really. My mother died when I was 12, trying to birth a son that died with her. Father raised me like the son he'd never have. Taught me to ride, shoot, work the land. But he couldn't change what I was. A woman who stood eye to eye with most men, who could outwork half of them. She pulled her knees to her chest, looking smaller despite her height. Every social, every church gathering, I was the oddity. The giant girl who'd never find a husband. Mothers would point me out to their daughters as a warning about growing too tall, as if I'd chosen it. Men would court me on dares from their friends, see if they could climb the mountain. They'd joke. Then came Thomas, she continued, her voice softening. He was bringing supplies to neighboring farms, saw me splitting wood in the rain. Instead of riding past like everyone else, he stopped, took off his coat, and helped. Didn't say a word about my height, didn't stare, just worked beside me until the job was done. Then he tipped his hat and said, "Same time tomorrow, if you need help." He came back every day for a month before he even asked my name. Josiah found himself sitting on the floor near her chair, drawn by her story. He sounds like a good man. He was, Eliza said, tears threatening but not falling. Said I was perfect, built for frontier life, not ballroom dancing. We had 2 years together before the fever took him. 2 years of feeling like I belonged somewhere, like I fit in my own skin for the first time. Her voice wavered. The gold claim was supposed to be our future. Children, a real house, a life where being different didn't matter. Now Judge Crow wants to take even that memory from me. Tell me about the claim, Josiah said, his tactical mind already working. How much gold? Where's it located? Thomas found it by accident, really. Was hunting elk. Followed one into a box canyon nobody else knew about. Found a vein of gold thick as your thumb running through the rock. He filed the claim quiet-like, didn't want attention. But someone at the claims office must have talked. Week after Thomas died, Crow showed up with papers saying Thomas owed him $10,000. Josiah whistled low. That claim must be worth 10 times that for Crow to send 12 men. More, Eliza admitted. Thomas thought it might be one of the biggest strikes in Colorado. He wanted to mine it slow, not flood the market, build something lasting. She looked at Josiah directly. I know you don't owe me anything. You've already done more than anyone else would. But I can't let Crow take it. Not because of the money, but because it's all I have left of the only person who ever loved me as I am. Josiah stood, moved to the door, checking the bar was secure. You're wrong, he said quietly. About two things. First, I do owe you something. You've reminded me what it's like to give a damn about someone besides myself. That's worth more than gold. He turned to face her. Second, Thomas wasn't the only person who could love you as you are. You're not too tall or too strong. You're exactly right for this life, for these mountains. Crow and his men, they're the ones who don't belong here. Outside, a wolf howled, long and mournful. Others joined it, a chorus that made the men at their campfires huddle closer together, add more wood to their flames. But inside the cabin, two wounded souls sat in comfortable silence, finding in each other what they'd thought was lost forever. Understanding, acceptance, and maybe, just maybe, hope for something more than mere survival. Morning came with Josiah, shaking Eliza awake gently, his large hand careful on her shoulder. If you're staying on my mountain, you need to learn its ways, he said, handing her a pair of his boots stuffed with cloth to make them fit. They were still too big, but better than her destroyed shoes. Can't protect you if you can't protect yourself. And after yesterday, they'll come harder, meaner. Vance doesn't take humiliation well. Her feet were healing faster than expected, the mountain air and Josiah's poultices working their magic. The cuts had closed clean, no sign of infection, though each step still sent sparks of pain up her legs. She could walk now, though she had to be careful. Josiah had re-wrapped them this morning with strips of clean cloth boiled in pine needle tea, an old remedy he'd learned from a Ute medicine woman years before Sand Creek, back when the Army had sometimes tried talking before shooting. He led her outside for the first time since she'd arrived. The morning mist clung to the pines like ghost fingers, and the air tasted clean and sharp, like breathing silver. The world looked different from up here, she realized. The valley spread below them like a map, the camps of Crow's men visible as smoke wisps rising through the trees. They looked small from this height, insignificant, not the terrifying force that had chased her for 3 days. First lesson, Josiah said, kneeling by what looked like ordinary forest floor. His fingers traced an almost invisible line through the pine needles. See this? She had to kneel beside him to see what he meant. A thin vine, no thicker than her little finger, stretched between two trees at ankle height. It looked natural, like it had grown there. Tripwire. Natural vine, trained to grow across the path over 3 seasons. Step on it wrong, and that boulder up there comes down. Eliza looked up, saw the massive rock balanced impossibly on a ledge above them. It must have weighed 500 pounds. Maybe more. You use the mountain itself as a weapon, she said, understanding dawning. Not fighting against it, but with it. Like the mountain is your ally. Josiah nodded, pleased by her quick perception. 7 years I've been learning this mountain's language. Every stream that could hide your sound, every cliff that could mask your silhouette, every wind pattern that carries scent. The mountain provides if you know how to ask. Most people try to conquer mountains, cut through them, blast them with dynamite for mines or railroads. But if you listen, if you pay attention, the mountain will teach you its secrets. They spent the morning moving through his territory. He showed her the safe paths, the ones that looked dangerous but were actually secure. Then the false paths, inviting and clear but leading to dead ends or drops. Eliza proved surprisingly adept, her height actually helping her reach handholds he pointed out, her long stride covering difficult terrain efficiently. When she had to duck under low branches, she did it gracefully, like a dancer, not awkwardly like he'd expected. You move well for someone raised on flat land, Josiah observed, watching her navigate a particularly tricky section of rock. Father's farm was in the foothills, she explained, testing each handhold before trusting her weight to it, exactly as he'd shown her. I spent more time in the hills than the house, especially after Mother died. The hills didn't whisper about me behind their hands. She learned to read the signs Josiah pointed out. Broken twigs that meant large game had passed, or might mean people trying to look like animals had. Disturbed moss showing the age of a track, fresh and green or old and brown. The difference between bird calls that were real and those that might be signals between hunters. When she successfully spotted one of his older traps before he pointed it out, a false floor covered with years of natural debris, Josiah actually smiled. It transformed his scarred face completely, made him look younger, like the man he might have been without Sand Creek. "You're a natural," he said, and there was something like pride in his voice. "Most people fight the mountain, try to dominate it. You're learning to move with it, like you belong here." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest at his approval. After years of being told she was too much, too tall, too strong, too unladylike, here was someone who saw those things as advantages. "Maybe I do belong here," she said quietly. "More than I ever belonged down there." They were heading back when they heard it. Voices below, getting closer and angrier than yesterday. Vance had regrouped his remaining 8 men, and they were trying a new approach. Moving in one large group, checking every step, guns drawn and ready. They'd found Hutchins in the night, had to cut him down while he sobbed with relief and pain. His leg might never work right again. They'd pulled Bennett and Cole from the pit at dawn, Cole delirious with pain from his shattered ankle. 4 men down, and they'd never even seen their attacker clearly. Josiah pulled Eliza behind a massive pine, his body shielding hers instinctively. She could feel his heartbeat through his shirt, steady despite the danger. He wasn't afraid, she realized. He was calculating, planning, already 3 moves ahead. "Time for your first real lesson," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "See that overhang? The one with the snow packed on top." Eliza looked where he pointed. The recent warm days followed by cold nights had made the snowpack unstable, layers of ice between layers of powder, ready to slide with the slightest disturbance. The physics of it made sense immediately. "One good hit to that dead tree below it," she said, already understanding. "The vibration travels up through the roots, disturbs the snow base." Josiah handed her his rifle, the weight of it surprising in her hands. It was well maintained, the action smooth, the wood worn smooth where his hands had held it. "You said you couldn't shoot. Time to learn. Don't need to hit anyone, just that tree. About 40 yards, slight downward angle. The mountain will do the rest." Her hands shook as she raised the rifle. From below, she could hear Vance cursing, demanding his men spread out despite their fear. "If you bunch up like sheep, you're easy prey," he was shouting. "Spread out, cover each other, and find that son of a bitch." "Breathe," Josiah whispered, his hand steadying her shoulder. His touch was gentle but firm, grounding her. "In through your nose. Hold it. Let half out. Then squeeze. Don't pull, squeeze. The mountain wants to help. Let it." Eliza did as he said. The world narrowed to the sight picture, the dead tree centered perfectly. She squeezed the trigger, surprised when the rifle fired, the recoil driving into her shoulder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a crack like thunder. The snowpack shifted, fractured, and began to slide. Not a full avalanche, but enough. Tons of snow and ice poured down the slope, a white wave that caught 4 of Vance's men perfectly. She watched them disappear under the white wave, heard their panicked screams muffled by snow. The remaining men scattered like rabbits, all discipline forgotten. One man threw down his rifle and ran back down the trail, yelling about demons and curses. Another fell to his knees, praying loudly. "They'll live," Josiah said, watching the chaos with satisfaction. "Snow's not deep enough to kill, just enough to bury them for a while. By the time they dig out, they'll be too cold and scared to continue today." He took the rifle back, his fingers brushing hers. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. You did good. Real good. Natural aim, steady hands once you committed. Your father teach you that breathing technique. He tried to teach me to shoot when I was younger, Eliza admitted. But mother forbade it. Said it wasn't ladylike. After she died, father started again, but then he got sick. Never got to finish the lessons. As they made their way back to the cabin, Josiah walking closer to her than necessary, ready to catch her if her feet gave out, Eliza realized something had changed. She wasn't just hiding anymore. She was learning to fight back. And with this scarred mountain man as her teacher, she was discovering strength she'd never known she possessed. The mountain was teaching her its language, and she was finding she spoke it naturally, like she'd been born to these heights and harsh beauties. From below, Vance's voice rose in rage, screaming at the mountain itself now, having figured out this wasn't coincidence or bad luck. Show yourself, you coward. Face us like a man. But the mountain only answered with silence and wind, keeping its secrets, protecting its own. The old trapper's screams echoed through the valley as Vance pressed the hot knife against his shoulder again. The smell of burning flesh filled the small cabin where they'd dragged him. I'll ask one more time, old man. The ghost of the mountain. Who is he? Where does he hide? The trapper, a weathered soul named Ezra who'd traded with Josiah for years without asking questions, spat blood at Vance's feet. His face was swollen from the beating, one eye completely closed, lips split and bleeding. Don't know no ghost. Ezra gasped through broken teeth. Just mountains and wind up there. Maybe you boys angered the spirits. These peaks got old magic, older than white men, older than anyone. But Vance had seen the fear flash in his eyes at the mention of the ghost. Everyone in the valley knew the stories. A scarred man who appeared and disappeared like smoke, who left supplies for struggling families in winter but was never seen. Fresh meat would appear on doorsteps of widows. Medicine would be found by sick children's beds. Some said he was a spirit of vengeance from the Indian Wars. Others claimed he was a deserter from the war, hiding from military justice. Fine, Vance said, turning to his remaining men. Only 4 stood with him now, the others too injured or too scared to continue. Burn his cabin. Let's see if ghosts come to save old friends. From their hidden vantage point high above, Josiah and Eliza watched smoke rise from Ezra's home. Everything the old man owned was going up in flames. His winter supplies, the furs he'd trapped, the little cabin he'd built with his own hands over 20 years. Josiah's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white, the tendons standing out like rope. That old man never hurt anyone, he said, voice dangerous as a rattlesnake's rattle. Ezra kept my secret for 7 years, never asked for nothing in return. Brought me news from the valley, traded fair, never tried to follow me home. The tactical part of his mind knew this was bait, designed to draw him out. But the human part, the part Eliza had awakened, couldn't stand by and watch innocents suffer for his choices. We have to help him, Eliza said, already knowing what his answer would be. She could see the war in his face, duty against safety, conscience against survival. Not we. Me. You stay here, stay hidden. This is my fight. But Eliza grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. He could have broken it easily, but her touch stopped him more effectively than chains would have. No, they're hunting me, remember? This is happening because of me. That old man is suffering because they can't find me. I won't hide while you risk everything alone. Not anymore. Before Josiah could argue, hoofbeats thundered up the main trail. Not more of Vance's hired guns. This was different. The horses were better, their gait steady and strong. An expensive carriage, completely out of place on the rough mountain road, appeared around the bend, surrounded by 6 armed guards in matching dusters. Professional killers, not the rabble Vance had brought. The carriage door opened, and out stepped a man who looked like civilization's sharp edge. Pressed black suit despite the wilderness, silver beard trimmed perfect, cold eyes that had sentenced dozens to hang without blinking. Judge Harlan Crow himself had come to finish what his men couldn't. He moved like a man who owned everything he could see and was shopping for the rest. Mr. Vance. Crow's voice carried clear in the mountain air, cultured and cold. I'm disappointed. 12 men against one woman, and you've lost 8? I'm paying you enough to hunt down a regiment, and you can't handle one widow? Vance tried to explain about the ghost, the traps, the avalanche, but Crow silenced him with a gesture. Superstitious nonsense. What we have here is someone helping the woman, someone who knows these mountains. He surveyed the peaks around them like a general planning a siege. So we'll make this simple. Burn it all. Every tree, every bush. Fire has a way of flushing out even the most stubborn game. Josiah went very still beside Eliza. She'd learned to read his moods over the past days, and this stillness was different from his usual calm. This was the stillness before an avalanche, before a storm breaks. He's not bluffing, Josiah said quietly. Men like him would rather rule over ashes than lose control. I've seen his type before. They destroyed whole villages in the war just to prove they could. He turned to her, and she saw decision in his gray eyes. The careful, cautious man who'd hidden for 7 years was gone. In his place stood Captain Ridge, officer and warrior. Get back to the cabin. Pack what food you can carry. The emergency pack is under the loose floorboard by the bed. If this goes bad, you run. North Trail to the cave system I showed you yesterday. You can hide there for weeks if needed. I said no. Eliza stated firmly, standing to her full height, matching him eye to eye. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. Now it's my turn. She picked up the rifle he'd taught her to use. Besides, you said it yourself. I'm built for this life. Time to prove it. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words. They were no longer stranger and refugee, but partners. You don't understand, Josiah said urgently. Crow brought professionals. Those aren't hired thugs. They're killers. Probably ex-military like me. They'll know tactics. They'll work as a unit. Then we'll need to be smarter, Eliza said. You know this mountain. I know Crow. He's the one who had my parents' farm seized 5 years ago on false tax claims. He's the reason I had nothing when Thomas found me. This isn't just about Thomas's claim. This is about everything he's taken from everyone. Down below, Crow was giving orders. Set fire lines here and here. We'll burn in sections, drive anything living toward the box canyon. Post men at every water source. Smoke them out like rats. His voice carried the casual tone of a man ordering dinner, not destruction. Old Ezra, bloodied and broken, was dragged before the judge. You know these mountains, trapper. You'll guide us, or I'll have Vance cut pieces off you until you do. Ezra raised his head, blood dripping from his chin. I'd rather die than help you burn these mountains. This land's been good to me. I won't betray it. Crow nodded to Vance, who drew his knife again. But before he could use it, a shot rang out. The knife went spinning from Vance's hand, his fingers numbed by the impact. Everyone dove for cover, but no second shot came. Instead, Josiah's voice echoed from the peaks, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Judge Crow, you want the woman, she's here. You want the gold claim, we can discuss it. But you harm that old man further. You try to burn my mountain, and I'll make what happened to your men yesterday look like mercy. Crow stood calmly, brushing dust from his suit. Ah, the famous ghost reveals himself. You've cost me time and men, sir. That demands recompense. Your men came hunting an innocent woman. They got what they deserved, Josiah's voice replied. Take your wounded and leave. Last warning. Crow smiled, cold as winter moonlight. I think not. You see, I know who you are now, Captain Ridge. Oh yes, Vance recognized your handiwork. The deserter of Sand Creek. $5,000 bounty, dead or alive. Add that to the claim, and this trip becomes very profitable indeed. Up in their hiding spot, Eliza saw Josiah's face change. His secret was out. There would be no more hiding after this, win or lose. Then I guess we do this the hard way, he said quietly to her. You sure you want to stand with me? They know who I am now. That makes you guilty by association. Eliza checked the rifle, made sure she had ammunition. I've been guilty by association my whole life. Guilty of being too tall, too strong, too much. Might as well be guilty of something worthwhile for once. She looked at him directly. We do this together, or not at all. The sun was starting its descent toward the peaks, painting everything gold and red. Soon it would be dark, and in the darkness, the mountain belonged to those who knew its secrets. Crow might have brought professionals, but they were still strangers here. This was Josiah's domain, and now Eliza's too. The stakes had risen beyond a simple gold claim. This was about survival, justice, and perhaps something more. Something worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. Together then, Josiah agreed. And for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't alone in a fight. It felt strange. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The storm came from nowhere, as mountain storms do. Black clouds swallowed the sun like a hungry beast, and within minutes, snow fell so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Josiah smiled grimly. The mountain was choosing sides, answering Crow's threat of fire with water and ice. He and Eliza moved through the white chaos like they were born to it, while below, Crow's men stumbled blind, their careful formations falling apart. They'd spent the last hour preparing, setting new traps, checking weapons, planning routes through the storm they both felt coming. Mountain folk knew the signs, the way birds went quiet, the pressure in your ears, the taste of metal on the wind. City men like Crow's guards didn't. They were caught completely off guard when the blizzard hit, their visibility reduced to nothing, their fancy rifles useless when you couldn't see what to shoot. They struck fast and silent. Eliza had learned well over the past days. She moved along the ridge while Josiah circled below, using paths he'd memorized so thoroughly he could walk them blind. A guard standing too close to the cliff edge, trying to find shelter from the wind, suddenly found the ground crumbling beneath him. Not pushed, just the snow-covered edge giving way under his weight. Helped along by Eliza prying loose a key support stone. His scream was swallowed by the storm as he tumbled into white nothing. Another guard turned to find his rifle missing, taken by hands he never saw. Josiah had approached from directly behind, moving when the wind gusted loudest, lifting the weapon away smooth as picking an apple. By the time the man realized and reached for his sidearm, Josiah was gone, vanished into the white, leaving the guard weaponless and terrified. The storm swallowed their shouts, made their numbers meaningless. One by one, they vanished into the white void, not dead but lost, wandering in circles, panic making them careless. Some walked off cliffs they couldn't see. Others fell into hidden ravines. 2 men shot at shadows and ended up shooting each other in the leg, the screams and chaos making them think they were under attack from multiple directions. Through it all, Vance's voice cut like a blade. "Ridge. I know it's you, Ridge. Captain Josiah Ridge." The name echoed off the canyon walls, audible even over the wind. Josiah froze, memories flooding back at hearing his full name spoken aloud after 7 years. Eliza saw his face change through the swirling snow, saw recognition and old pain surface like bodies from deep water. Vance continued shouting into the storm. "Thought I recognized your handiwork. Same tactics you used at Washita River, before you turned coward, before you betrayed your own unit for a bunch of savages." That name, Washita River, hit Josiah like a physical blow. Another massacre, another time he tried to stop the killing of innocents. That was where he'd first met Vance, then a sergeant under Custer, where he'd first refused orders to kill women and children, where the path to Sand Creek had really begun. Josiah emerged from the snow like a wraith, appearing suddenly in front of Vance. The storm seemed to part around him, creating a pocket of clarity in the chaos. "Samuel Vance," he said quietly, his voice carrying despite the wind. "Should have known Crow would hire you. You always did like hurting folks who couldn't fight back. Remember that Cheyenne girl at Washita? Couldn't have been more than 14. You shot her while she was trying to surrender." Vance grinned, ugly and triumphant, his scarred face twisting. The great Captain Ridge, reduced to hiding on a mountain like a scared rabbit. Colonel Chivington still has a bounty on your head. $5,000 for the traitor who tried to save those savages at Sand Creek. Add that to what Crow's paying, and you're worth more than that gold claim. They circled each other in the snow, 2 soldiers meeting again after 7 years. The storm raged around them, but in their small circle, Everything was still, like the eye of a hurricane. They were children, Josiah said, his voice carrying old pain and newer anger. Babies in their mother's arms. You held the torch that burned the lodges yourself. I watched you do it. Vance laughed, a sound ugly as his soul. And I'd do it again. Orders are orders. Something you never understood. The only good Indian is a dead Indian, Ridge. You chose the wrong side then, and you're choosing wrong now, protecting this giant bitch. The fight happened fast. Vance drew his pistol, but 7 years of soft living had slowed him, while 7 years of mountain survival had honed Josiah to a keen edge. Josiah moved like the mountain had taught him, fluid and sure, using the storm and snow to his advantage. The gun went flying into the white darkness. They grappled, fell, rolled toward the ravine edge. Vance was still strong, still vicious. He pulled a knife, the same one he'd used on old Ezra. It caught Josiah's shoulder, slicing deep through coat and shirt, sending blood across the white ground. The pain was sharp and immediate, but Josiah had lived with worse pain for 7 years. He trapped Vance's wrist, bent it back until bones creaked. Then Eliza was there. She'd approached silent as the snowfall itself, rifle raised. But she didn't shoot Vance. Instead, she brought the stock down hard on his wrist, a precise blow that broke his grip on the knife. The crack of breaking bone was audible even over the wind. "Nobody hurts the people I care about," she said fiercely, and in that moment Josiah understood she meant him. She cared about him. Vance scrambled backward, cradling his broken wrist, and found himself at the ravine edge. The ground, weakened by snow and weather, turned treacherous by the storm, crumbled like old bread. He grabbed for purchase, found none, his eyes wide with the sudden understanding of his fate. His scream lasted 3 seconds before it cut off abruptly, swallowed by the ravine and storm. Josiah struggled to stand, blood soaking his shirt, more than he wanted to admit. Eliza caught him, held him steady, her strength surprising even now. "You came for me," he said, wonder in his voice. "You could have run when the storm hit. Could have made it to the caves, been safe." She pressed her hand against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, her fingers quickly turning red. "You still don't understand, do you? I'm not running anymore. Not from them, not from this, not from you. We're partners, remember? Together or not at all." Through the storm, they heard Crow shouting for his men, but only 2 voices answered. The rest were lost in the blizzard, scattered across the mountain, some probably dead from falls or cold. The judge's superior numbers meant nothing now. The mountain had taken them, sorted them, left only the worst for last. "Can you walk?" Eliza asked, supporting most of his weight. The wound was bad, worse than he was letting on. She could feel him shaking, whether from cold or blood loss she couldn't tell. He nodded, though she could feel him leaning heavily on her. "We need to end this," he said through gritted teeth. "Crow won't stop. Men like him never do. Not unless someone stops them permanent. He'll come back with an army if he has to. Burn the whole mountain to get what he wants." Together, they moved through the storm toward where they'd last heard the judge's voice. 2 wounded souls protecting each other, ready to make their final stand. The mountain held around them, but they were no longer afraid. They had each other, and sometimes that's all the strength you need. The storm was their ally now, and in its white fury, they would end this one way or another. Crow was out there, probably huddled with his remaining men, trying to wait out the storm. He didn't understand that on this mountain, in this storm, waiting was dying. Josiah and Eliza knew every sheltered spot, every windbreak, every place a man might think was safe but wasn't. The hunter had become the hunted, and the storm would be his judge. Blood dripped from Josiah's wound, leaving a trail in the snow, but he kept moving. Beside him, Eliza was fierce and determined, no longer the desperate woman he'd found on the trail. She'd become something more, something the mountain had shaped, something worthy of these harsh peaks and unforgiving storms. Together, they disappeared into the white, ready to finish what Crow had started. The box canyon was a trap of Crow's own making. He'd driven Eliza there in his mind, thinking the high walls meant no escape, planning to corner her like an animal. But now, With the storm clearing and only 2 men left beside him, the judge discovered he'd cornered something far more dangerous than a desperate widow. The canyon walls rose like prison bars against the gray sky, ice coating the rocks, making them shine like steel. At its narrow entrance stood Josiah Ridge, bloody but unbowed, rifle steady despite his wounded shoulder. The storm had passed as quickly as it came, leaving everything covered in white, transformed into an alien landscape. Drifts reached 6 feet in places. The bodies of Crow's men were scattered across the mountain, some dead from falls, others from cold, a few still alive but wishing they weren't. The 2 remaining guards flanked Crow, professional killers who'd survived by being smarter than the others, but even they looked shaken. The mountain had shown them how small they really were. "Judge Crow," Josiah called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Each word seemed to bounce back doubled, tripled, coming from everywhere at once. "You came all this way for a piece of paper. Was it worth it? 8 men lost to the mountain, Vance dead in a ravine, your professional guards reduced to 2 scared boys." Crow stepped forward, still playing the part of civilized authority even here, miles from any courthouse. His expensive suit soaked and torn, but his bearing still arrogant. Snow clung to his silver beard, making him look older, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. "Captain Ridge. Oh yes, I know who you are. Vance recognized you. Sent word before he died. The deserter of Sand Creek, the coward who chose savages over his own kind. There's still a bounty on your head. $5,000, dead or alive." Behind Crow, up on the canyon rim, Eliza worked her way along the narrow ledge. Every movement sent pain through her still-healing feet, but she climbed anyway, using skills Josiah had taught her and some he hadn't, natural ability combined with desperate determination. The old mine shaft sat hidden behind brush at the top, a dark mouth in the mountain that dropped 40 feet straight down into blackness. Abandoned when the silver ran out, forgotten by everyone except the man who'd mapped every danger on his mountain. She'd noticed it when Josiah had shown her the canyon during their training, filed it away as a danger to avoid. Now it might be their salvation. The judge stood maybe 20 feet from it, focused entirely on Josiah, not knowing death waited behind him. She began carefully moving rocks, creating a barrier that would funnel movement toward the shaft. "You want the claim," Eliza called down, drawing Crow's attention. She stood at the rim now, silhouetted against the gray sky, tall and fierce as the mountain itself. "It's yours. I'll sign. You win." The judge smiled, victory lighting his cold eyes. "Finally, sense prevails. Come down, Mrs. Thornton. Let's conclude our business." His guards relaxed slightly, thinking the fight was over. But Eliza shook her head. "First, you let him go. Josiah leaves, safe passage down the mountain. Then I'll sign. You get what you came for. Nobody else has to die." Josiah understood her plan instantly, could see the trap she was building. "No," he said firmly, playing his part. "Eliza, don't do this. The claim is yours. Thomas wanted you to have it." "Thomas is dead," she said, her voice carrying pain that wasn't entirely acted. "And I'm tired of running, tired of fighting. If signing saves your life, it's worth it." Crow laughed, the sound ugly in the canyon, bouncing off the walls like breaking glass. Touching, the giant and the ghost, thinking they have leverage. He pulled out papers from inside his coat. Somehow they'd survived the storm, probably in a waterproof case. "Always prepared, always thinking ahead. Here's what actually happens. You both surrender. Mrs. Thornton signs. Then I decide what to do with you. The bounty on Ridge is dead or alive, after all." His 2 remaining guards raised their rifles, aiming at Josiah. Professional soldiers, their aim would be true even at this distance. "Drop the rifle, Captain. Hands where we can see them." That's when Josiah did something unexpected. He dropped his rifle, raised his hands, and walked forward, straight toward them. "You want someone to blame for your men? Take me. The woman had nothing to do with it. I set the traps, caused the avalanche, triggered the storm. The lie came easy. She's been my prisoner, leveraged to keep you from burning the mountain. I grabbed her when she collapsed, figured she might be worth something." Eliza started to protest, But Josiah continued, moving closer to Crow with each word. Think about it, Judge. You bring back the famous deserter of Sand Creek, the ghost of the mountain. That's worth more than killing a widow. You'd be a hero, the man who caught the uncatchable. They'd probably make you territorial governor. Greed flickered in Crow's eyes. The claim plus the bounty on Ridge would make him even richer, and the fame would give him power beyond mere money. He moved forward, drawn by the promise of profit, his guards following automatically, maintaining their formation but focused on Josiah. On your knees, deserter, he commanded when Josiah was close enough. You're going to hang for treason, but I might make it quick if you cooperate. Josiah complied, kneeling in the snow about 15 feet from the hidden mine shaft. His shoulder was still bleeding, leaving red drops on the white ground. Crow stood over him, savoring the moment of victory. You know what happens to traitors, Ridge? They die alone, unmourned, their names becoming cautionary tales. Same thing that happens to everyone eventually, Josiah said quietly, his hand finding a concealed piece of shale under the snow, sharp as a blade. He'd placed it there earlier, one of many weapons hidden around his mountain. We face judgment, some of us sooner than others. He moved fast, faster than a wounded man should be able to. The shale slashed across the back of Crow's knee, cutting through expensive fabric and flesh, severing tendons. Crow screamed, stumbling backward, his leg no longer supporting him. The two guards rushed forward, but Eliza was already moving. The rifle shot echoed through the canyon, not aimed at men, but at the old support beam she'd noticed earlier, the one holding back loose rocks above the mine shaft. The beam splintered with a crack like thunder. Rocks tumbled, creating a small avalanche that forced everyone to dodge. Crow, off balance and stumbling backward from Josiah's attack, stepped exactly where Eliza had hoped, his good leg trying to compensate for his damaged one. Moving without looking, focused on the threat in front instead of behind. The brush covering the mine shaft gave way under his weight. For a moment, he seemed to hang in the air, arms windmilling, eyes wide with sudden understanding. Then gravity took him. His scream was short, echoing up from the shaft, ending with a wet sound that made the guards freeze. 40 feet onto rocks, no one survived that. The two guards looked at each other, then at the wounded man rising from his knees and the woman on the rim with a rifle. They were professionals, doing a job, not believers in Crow's cause. Their employer was dead, which meant they wouldn't be paid. More importantly, they'd seen what this mountain could do, how it protected its own. Run, Josiah said simply, picking up his rifle despite his wounded shoulder. Run and never come back. Tell them the giant widow died in the storm. Tell them the ghost of the mountain is just a story. Tell them whatever you want, but if I see you on my mountain again, you'll join your boss in that hole. They ran, dropping their rifles, scrambling down the trail like the mountain itself was chasing them. In the sudden silence that followed, only the wind could be heard, whistling through the canyon like a funeral dirge. Eliza made her way down to Josiah, who was swaying on his feet, the adrenaline wearing off and blood loss catching up. You planned that, he said, half accusation, half admiration. The mine shaft, getting him to step backward, all of it. She helped support him, her strength keeping him upright when his legs wanted to buckle. You taught me to use the mountain, she said. Seemed fitting that the mountain would judge him in the end. He wanted to burn it, destroy it for profit. Now he's part of it forever. They stood together in the canyon, surrounded by white and silence, two people who'd found each other in violence, but might build something in peace. The threat was over, but the cost had been high. Josiah's wound needed serious attention, and they both knew the fight had changed them. There was no going back to who they'd been before. The giant widow and the ghost of the mountain had died in this canyon along with Crow. What remained were just Josiah and Eliza, two souls who'd fought for each other in one. 3 weeks had passed since Judge Crow fell into the mountain's judgment. The first snow of real winter dusted the peaks, different from the storm snow, gentler, like a blessing instead of a battle. Inside the cabin that had become their home, Eliza carefully unwrapped the bandage from Josiah's shoulder. The wound had been bad, worse than either of them admitted those first days. The knife had gone deep, nicked an artery, and infection had set in despite their best efforts. There were nights when she thought she'd lose him just when she'd found him. The fever had burned through him like wildfire for 5 days, leaving him delirious, calling out names of the dead from Sand Creek, reaching for children who weren't there. She'd held him through the worst of it, sponging his burning skin with cold mountain water, forcing willow bark tea between his lips, whispering to him about the future, about the life they could build together, about being more than just survivors hiding from the world. "You stayed," he said now, watching her work with those gray eyes that had first frightened, then intrigued, and now comforted her. "You could have left when I was unconscious. Taken the claim papers, started fresh somewhere nobody knows you. Somewhere you wouldn't be the giant widow anymore." Eliza finished with the bandage and sat back, studying his face. The fever had left him thinner, but his color was good again, the gray pallor of near death replaced by healthy mountain tan. "Still don't understand, do you? The claim was never just about gold. It was about having something that was mine, something nobody could take." She touched his scarred cheek gently, feeling him lean into her palm. "I found something better. Someone who sees me as I am and doesn't want me to be smaller, quieter, or different. The mountain gave me you." She stood, moving to the window where she could see the valley spread below. "Besides, where would I go? Every town for 300 miles knows the story now. The giant widow who disappeared in a blizzard, along with 12 of Judge Crow's men. They think we're all dead, frozen in the mountains. Better that way." A horse appeared on the trail below, and both tensed until they recognized the rider. Old Ezra, the trapper Vance had tortured, moving slow but steady. He'd survived, though he walked with a limp now and his left arm hung useless from the torture. He'd been their connection to the world below for these 3 weeks, bringing supplies and news, taking gold from the claim to trade for necessities. He dismounted carefully, favoring his injuries, and Josiah met him at the door. The old man's face split into a grin through his gray beard. "Got news," he said, handing over a leather satchel. "Big news." Inside were papers, legal documents from the territorial court, sealed and official. With Crow dead and his corruption exposed by the 2 fleeing guards who'd told quite a story to save their own skins, his entire network had crumbled. Other victims had come forward, dozens of families he'd cheated, stolen from, destroyed. The territorial governor had launched an investigation, finding evidence of murders, theft, and fraud going back 20 years. Says here, Ezra pointed to one document, that all of Crow's seized properties are being returned to their rightful owners or their heirs. That includes your parents' farm, Eliza. It's yours again if you want it. Eliza took the paper with trembling hands. The farm she'd grown up on, where her mother was buried, where her father had taught her to be strong. She could go back, rebuild, be respectable again. "And there's more," Ezra continued, pulling out another document. "The territory is granting you both the entire mountain valley as protected land. Says here you're official caretakers, with a stipend and everything. Recognition for services to the community in eliminating a dangerous criminal enterprise." But the last document was the most surprising. "The military tribunal has reviewed the case of Captain Josiah Ridge," Ezra read slowly, knowing the weight of these words. "In light of new testimony from survivors of Sand Creek who've come forward and evidence of Colonel Chivington's illegal orders, all charges are dropped. Full pardon, restoration of rank if he wants it, and back pay for 7 years." Josiah sank into a chair, overwhelmed. 7 years of hiding, of being a ghost, and suddenly he was free. He could use his real name again, walk in daylight, have a future. "Survivors came forward?" he asked, voice rough. 12 of them, Ezra nodded. "The children you saved, grown now. They testified that you stood between them and the soldiers, that you nearly died trying to protect them. One of them, she's a teacher now, said she's been looking for you for years to thank you." Eliza moved behind Josiah, her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension there. "We could leave," she said quietly. "Go anywhere. Your parents' home in Virginia, my farm, anywhere you want. We're free." Josiah reached up, covering her hands with his. "What about you? You could have your farm back. Be respectable again. Not the giant widow anymore, just Eliza Thornton, landowner. She came around the chair, knelt in front of him so they were eye level. I don't want to be respectable. I don't want to be small and quiet and proper. I want to be here, on this mountain, with you. Building something new, something ours. Ezra cleared his throat. There's one more thing. The claim, Thomas's gold claim. The essay came back. It's richer than anyone imagined. You're wealthy, Eliza. Wealthy enough to do whatever you want. Go wherever you want. I know what I want, Eliza said, not looking away from Josiah's eyes. I want to stay here, on our mountain. Build a real home. Maybe bring in a few other lost souls who need sanctuary. The gold can help them, like this mountain helped us. Josiah stood, pulling her up with him, his wound protesting but ignorable now. The mountain keeps secrets, he said. It kept mine for 7 years. Kept me safe when the whole world wanted me dead. It keeps more than secrets, Eliza said, leaning into his warmth. It keeps promises. And I promise to spend whatever years I have showing you that you're more than your scars, more than your past. You're the man who saved me when I had nothing left to give. You saved me too, Josiah said, pulling her close. Saved me from becoming nothing but a ghost, from forgetting how to be human. You reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. Ezra had quietly left. Understanding this was a private moment. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and steady, covering the last traces of violence and fear. The bodies had been recovered, the survivors had fled, and the mountain was peaceful again. They stood together at the window, watching the snow transform their world into something clean and new. The gold would build their future, but the mountain had already given them everything that mattered. It had given them each other, two outcasts who'd thought they'd always be alone, finding home in each other's arms. No more ghost of the mountain, Josiah said. No more giant widow. Just us. Just us. Eliza agreed, and kissed him there in the cabin that had sheltered them, in the mountain that had protected them, in the place where two broken people had become whole. The mountain kept its newest promise, to shelter two hearts that had found their way through darkness into light. The gold claim would bring prosperity, maybe even comfort, but they'd already found their real treasure in each other. As the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, they began planning their future. A larger cabin for when children came, if they were blessed. A school for mountain children who had no other access to education. A sanctuary for those running from their own judge crows. Old Ezra would spread the word carefully to those who needed to hear it. That there was a place in the mountains where the lost could be found, where the broken could heal, where being different wasn't a curse but a strength. The ghost of the mountain and the giant widow were gone, those names buried with the men who'd created them. In their place stood Josiah and Eliza Ridge, guardians of the valley, proof that sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places. The mountain had tested them with blood and storm, fear and fire. They'd passed every test, not through violence, but through choosing to protect each other, choosing love over fear, choosing to stand together when standing alone would have been easier. Now the mountain blessed them with peace, with purpose, with a future neither had dared dream of when they'd first met on that desperate, bloody trail. As night fell over the peaks, they prepared their first meal as truly free people. No more looking over shoulders, no more false names, no more hiding. The lamplight from their cabin window glowed warm against the snow, a beacon for other lost souls who might need what they'd found. Safety, acceptance, love, home. If you've enjoyed this story of redemption and unlikely love in the Wild West, remember to click the like button and subscribe to ensure you never miss another tale of courage and second chances. Tomorrow's story will take you on another incredible journey where the broken become whole and the lost find their way home. So make sure you're here to experience it with us. Until then, remember that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold or silver, but the people who see us for who we truly are and love us anyway.